And that brings me to my next point I want to bring up, which is, why do animations really matter? Yes, the flashy part of things is interesting. It's cool to see what people can do. You can add glitter to your page, add some sparkle. But beyond that, is there some real utility for learning how to do CSS animations? And I think the answer is yes. This is a Medium article written by Michael Villar. I apologize if I'm butchering his name. He's a user interface developer at Stripe. So Stripe, you have probably come across if you buy things online frequently. It's a payment processing company / API. I probably butchered that as well, the explanation. But the key thing here is that this article, I think, does a great job of summing up a couple of the reasons why animations matter. So at Stripe, the payment experience is what they do, right? That is their product, really, is having a solid payment experience. So it really matters for them to improve that, to optimize it. And this article talks about why animations are used and how they're used to improve that process. So things like animations can add context. So here's an example of how an animation could provide some utility to a user to make things clear. So in this example, when a user clicks the Remember Me checkbox, there's a nice little kind of slide out or three-dimensional fold out animation where the phone number input slides down. And that really shows the user that there's a connection there, that there's context. You only need to input your phone number if you're checking the Remember Me checkbox, and that they're important, they're connected. So other things would be providing feedback to users. So a common one is this shaking or a jiggle, I guess to mimic sort of the shaking of somebody's head in a negative gesture. So when you try and pay without filling any information out, or you're missing a component, you get this error feedback. And it's more visceral, I guess. It's more visual. It's clearer, ideally, what's happening. Something that this article doesn't touch on, but that is related to this point, has to do with accessibility. People who have visual impairments often can benefit from animations on a page. They can, like I said, draw people's attention, make things clearer, as this is doing here, rather than just having a small red icon. Having the actual shake clearly indicates that this is not going to work. The next topic he goes into is what he refers to as sleight of hand, essentially creating an illusion of speed or snappiness, deceiving your users a little bit by using animations, making the experience seem better. What's happening here is that they're sending a verification code to a mobile device, and it takes a bit of time. And they have this little animation that starts off with sending code, sent, and then we just send a text message to your phone number. And the point he's making is that it's actually not true. They are sending it, but the animation is not in sync with that. You may get your text before that or afterwards. They don't know exactly how long it will take from the front end side of things. But this animation kind of provides this step-by-step process that is potentially more engaging for a user rather than just loading, and just kind of waiting. And you could be staring at this same state here the entire time. They decided to break it up. Even though on the back end, this has zero connection, zero influence. There's no relationship between what's actually being displayed and what's happening. But the animation makes it seem nicer. One more thing, this transition here, he talks about how there are two states. There's this first state, payment info. You click that, and it transitions to the pay button. But it uses the exact same transition as the above content. So if you notice one more time, it sort of slides over, and the button does the exact same thing. And he writes about how the reason he did that, the reason he has them match, the button matches the same transition as the content above, is to highlight that the actions are linked to that button. So as it changes, the actions change as well. And then we get to the last point he makes, which is what he calls the bonus round. This one sticks out a bit, but I still think it's really important. So it's not something that makes or breaks the actual flow. As he mentions, it could be removed without any serious consequence. It's just a nice looking flashy animation. But the reason he thinks it's important is that it indicates to users that this is a new site. This is something that is currently being worked on. This is not a company that is 10 years old with an old static site where animations weren't an option. This is something that was released recently. It's sharp, it's fresh. I think you get it. Hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. It can kind of lend your site and therefore your company some credibility, an air of professionalism, if you will. So while it may seem minor, I do agree with that having animations, having a polished site makes a difference. Okay, so that wraps up kind of the key points I wanted to talk about around why you should care about learning animations, why it's not just flashy sparkles that you're throwing on to a completed web page, but why it's actually an integral part of designing a website or designing an application. So before we dive into any code, there's one quick point I want to make. When we're actually learning this stuff, how do we transition something with CSS? How do we create a simple animation? How do we do a hover animation? Whatever we talk about in the next couple of videos, I think you'll see that getting things to move, getting things to animate is easy. That's actually the easy part. So it might seem intimidating at first, but if somebody asks you, move this over 20 pixels to the right when a user clicks on it, that's actually not very difficult as far as the syntax and the code. But what is hard about animating, and this is something that I learned personally when I started out with animations, something that I have seen a lot of students encounter and get frustrated by. The hard part is that planning how things should work, conceptualizing the animation, designing things is hard. So getting things to move is easy, but planning how they should move is hard. And I think that's true of a lot of things, but especially animations. So if you have some great idea, implementing it often is not that difficult. Maybe if there's some crazy curves and complex trajectories you need things to follow, where you have to get into some math and trig, yes, that could be difficult. But typically, most web apps, most of the animations you see are not that difficult to implement. Again, the hard part is conceptualizing it. That's where having a design background or having a designer on your team can really help. And I'm not a designer, I'll be upfront about that. I do my best to make these examples look good, to come up with real-world animations, but it's something I struggle with as well. When I'm designing my own apps, I always talk to somebody about how the animation should work, because usually my first instinct is not great. Okay, so with all that said, we talked about why animations matter, we saw some cool things you can do with animations. Now we're going to dive into code. All right, see you in the next video.